This is Chris Rowe from BCI Entertainment. I'm here today with Dark Star's own Lieutenant Doolittle, Brian Norrell. So, Brian, when did the acting bug get you?
Well, it really, I think, began in sophomore English class in high school when my English teacher wanted to do an experiment to show how people under stress don't really remember things well, like giving police reports. So she had me come late to class every day. This is based on the fact that we've been reading Shakespeare in class. And I was Julius Caesar up until he got killed and I took over the part of Brutus, which tells you something. And so she chose me to play this part in real life of coming in late. So on Friday I came in late, and she has these mimeographed reports for them to fill out. They don't know this yet. And the guy in front of the class who's giving the report is in on this too. He's the biggest guy in the class. So she says, "Mr. Norrell, you're late for the fourth time this week." And I go, "Oh, don't give me that shit." And everybody just freezes. And then I lay into her with every word in the book, and I come for her. And the other student gets in front of me like he's supposed to, and I swing at him like I'm supposed to, and he grabs me like he's supposed to. Now, that's all the planned part. The unplanned part is just about every guy in that classroom got up and started pounding on me. And it hurt, but I was also laughing, you know? And I got pulled out in the hall, which was a relief, and I fell on the floor, and I was just buckled over laughing, even though it hurt getting beat on by everybody. And then she passed out the forms, and they said all kinds of crazy things about what I was wearing, and that was the point of all that. And from there, I was cast in leading roles in every theater production that followed. But that was really a breakthrough moment of performance, an Academy Award-winning performance in English class. And from then, I think I was pretty struck. And I've been in theater doing something or other, performing, doing stand-up, which I do now, some with a puppet, ever since. And because of that, when I got to USC Film School and started doing stuff on stage, and I was told, you can't do that because USC Film School is overwhelming agenda. You can't be tootling around on stage. So as soon as they told me I couldn't do it, that meant I had to. And that's how I wound up being picked up on full scholarship by USC and touring Europe with the theater company. And I still get mail, and I still get invited to things from the Department of Theater as if I'm a member of it, which I never was. So I lived in two worlds, and that's part of why and how Carpenter, I'm sure, cast me, besides the fact that we lived together at one point in time, and we were in the same French class, and, you know, we rubbed elbows. But, I mean, everyone was probably aware I was also acting while I was doing all this other stuff.
So that brings us to the part of Doolittle. Tell us how you got that.
Well, like most of my acting career, I was minding my own business. When I went to Hollywood, to USC initially, my real intention was my love of animals. I mean, I grew up wanting to be a zoologist, but I was also a cartoonist, and I was also an actor. I couldn't stop these tendencies. So despite my intentions of taking over Jim Fowler's job on Wild Kingdom, that didn't happen. But I did wind up being sucked into animation. Because once you get into film school and you're an actor and you're a cartoonist, there's this vortex that's pulling you. So I was being pulled in that direction, and I was actually in the animation room animating a title sequence for a fellow student's film, Terry Winkless, who wrote The Howling, and another roommate. And so I'm working on Terry's film, and Carpenter walks in and says he'd like me to be in this film he's going to do. Well, we're always helping each other out. That's common practice, you know, in film school. And I said, oh, all right, okay. Plus, he was a roommate at the time that The Resurrection of Bronco Billy won the Academy Award for Best Short. And he was one of the guys who made it, but he didn't get to go to the award ceremony. The producer and the head of the department got to go. And he got to stay home, which is the house we all lived in. And I was in Chuck Adair's bedroom with Dale and a few other roommates watching the Academy Awards. And they announced the winner was The Resurrection of Bronco Billy, University of Southern California, Division of Cinema. And we all got excited, and I got up to go to the kitchen to get something, and Carpenter had been watching with his girlfriend in his bedroom off the kitchen. And he came in to get a Coca-Cola out of the fridge. So we met sort of in passing, and he just won the Oscar, you know. And I said, congratulations. You know, we shook hands, and he grabbed his Coke, and I grabbed my drink, and I went back into Chuck's bedroom, and he went back in his bedroom. And that was the big Hollywood moment. But so he'd already won an Academy Award, in essence. And so when he walked in while I was animating this other little thing and said, would you be in my next film? I said, okay. But it was critical to me, the timing, because I had to direct that semester at one point, and I had to shoot and edit, and all kinds of things I had to do. And so it was critical that we do his thing at a certain time, which is a real joke, because Dark Star took 3 years. And so November, we'll do it in November, okay? Because I have to, December 1st, I have to direct or something. And okay, you know, okay. And 3 years later, we're still shooting, because it just kept building and going on.
How long was the part supposed to last?
Well, I assume a couple of weeks in November. And it went on for 3 years, which meant I had to maintain that hair and beard, you know, for 3 years, which drove my bald conservative father absolutely batshit, you know. One of the side benefits.
What was it like working with John Carpenter?
John is very, well, initially, O'Bannon and I both were goofing around. I remember one of the first scenes we shot in the control room. We had this clever idea for coming up with something that's not at all called for, but we thought it was funny. So we, for the most part, I would say, to answer your question, I would say working with John is very easy. He knows what he wants. He's very genteel. He's a very much a Kentucky gentleman, and you know, easy to get along with. But this one day we did piss him off pretty good, because O'Bannon and I pulled this cockamamie thing during a take, which we thought was funny. And he yelled cut, and he didn't think it was funny at all, because they're using their tuition money and probably, you know, selling children on the side to raise money for the footage to do this with. And so to waste any film goofing around did not amuse him. So that was just the one correction. We got the message and didn't do that again. But all in all, he's a very genteel kind of guy to work with.
You're talking about joking around with Dan. What was it like working with Dan?
Well, Dan is not the same temperament as John. It wasn't, I mean, I'm not saying it wasn't easy to work with him, but he's just much more fiery, kind of intense kind of a character. But I had no problem working with him, and we got along.
Any funny stories you can share with us while working on Dark Star?
Well, they weren't funny at the time. I mean, I've thought about writing an article called Acting Without Oxygen. Because it was done with such spit and, you know, paste. For example, the back of Talby's space pack is the styrofoam packing from my girlfriend's friend Melissa Norman's Sony television set. So she got a new television, took it out of the box with that styrofoam stuff around it. And I said, don't throw that away, you know? And I gave it to Dan, you know, and it winds up on Talby's back. I'm just sort of going into the not funny zone, because it's funnier now. And that was the outer space stuff with the space helmet and all that EVA stuff. It was just a nightmare of, it was insulation duct, gaffer's tape to ski gloves, to a toy helmet that's painted up with vacuum cleaner hoses coming out of it. And they're all ready to shoot it, and then they realize they forgot one detail, and that is the person inside there has to breathe. And I mean, there wasn't much air in there to start with, and if I breathed, it would fog up the mask and ruin the take in no time. I mean, very quickly before we even shot. And we're shooting under a lot of foot candles at 16 millimeter those days. It was pretty hot. And so as a last thought, Dan got a piece of plastic hose, a tube or something, and he would stick it in my mouth and drape it out the back of the helmet, put the helmet back on me, and set me in position. And I would breathe through this little hose until he yelled action, and I'd spit the hose out. And then I'd say my next line to bomb number 20. Well, why can't you? You know, something like that. Just one or two lines, and then I'd be out of air in there. And the Dan would come and rip the helmet off me, taking my ears off. I mean, I needed the air, but I mean, it hurt, you know. And then with the space pack, he had to walk me sideways, and he would walk me out into fresh air and put a cold compress on my forehead and a cold compress on the back of my neck. And I sort of recover from this experience. And then he put the plastic tube back in my head, jammed the thing on me, and walked me sideways back through the doorway, put me in position, and I'd do another line. And then he'd rip it off and put the cold compresses. This went on over and over and over again. And it's funny now because it wasn't funny then. And like the freezer scene, where I'm supposed to be so cold. Of course, it's hotter than hell. And worse than that, instead of using mineral oil, which I've done in films subsequent, they used kerosene. They were spraying kerosene mist, which is probably extremely toxic and inordinately slippery. So I could just turn around and just fall on my ass in a second. It's like being on ice. And Carpenter was 5 feet away from me, and they wouldn't yell action until they couldn't see me anymore, because it dissolved quickly. So they had to just pump it up. And I had a wet face cloth over my mouth because you cannot breathe this stuff. And so as soon as he'd yell action, I would drop the face cloth, throw the face cloth, and turn around and act like, number one, I'm cold, and number two, I can breathe, neither of which I can. And try not to slip and kill myself. Other than that, it's a piece of cake, So that stuff is funny now, but it wasn't funny then.
So how'd you feel teaching Bomb 20 phenomenology?
Well, it's probably the closest I've ever gotten to philosophy in my life. I took one philosophy class once, and I said, I am so out of here. So, but when I was out there doing those scenes, in order to simulate a sense of kind of floatiness, it was actually really hard on the quadriceps, because I'm doing a semi-knee bend the whole time, and I'm moving myself around. So I don't want to be still. So that was the most difficult part of it, was just the deep knee bends. But the bomb itself, of course, is actually this big. It's made out of a trailer truck model kit, covered with little pieces of aircraft carrier detail, I think. And when it beeps into the armed position, it's because there are little pieces of Scotch-Lite material on the end of it, and there's a 45-degree angle glass, and there's a baby meaning a small light, a baby with a snoot on it, with a red gel, 90 degrees to the camera. So they just flick that red light like that into the glass. It hits the Scotch-Lite material, bounces back into the lens, and goes beep beep. Armed. And then when it goes back in the bomb bay, the camera's upside down. It's actually on. It's mounted upside down on top of the Fisher dolly that we use for the camera. So it's hydraulically just lowered, the hydraulics, like that. And then they have the belly of the ship upside down. It just goes down into there with the camera upside down, with the angled glass, with the whoop whoop. Smoke and mirrors, a lot of smoke and mirrors.
Well, we know what happened to Bomb 20 in the movie. What actually happened to it after the movie? The prop.
Well, that's the only artifact I was even aware existed. And my friend Dale Belden, who worked on the film, I think he shot the space stuff where I was trying to breathe. I learned years later that he inherited that somehow, and that it fell off his shelf in his apartment in Venice, in LA, and during an earthquake, and cracked, broke, I don't know. But whatever happened to it, he threw it out. And I have never forgiven him. Dale, are you listening?
Did you enjoy your talks with Talby in the movie?
Did I enjoy my talks with Talby? Well, I can't answer that question since I never talked to Talby. I actually never met Talby until the world premiere at Filmex in '74 on Hollywood Boulevard. I went with Carpenter to the premiere, and we went in the lobby ahead of the hordes out in the street. And there, sitting in the lobby, was Dre Payich, who plays Talby, who I had never seen in my entire life. And I met him. That's the only time I ever saw him. How do you do? Because anytime you see a two-shot of us in the dome, it's a double. It's not me. It's somebody who looks like me. Because the film was shot in pieces over long periods of time, and they weren't going to drag me back just to have me sit and listen to somebody. They got somebody to do that. And consequently, I never met him until then, which is really weird since he's my compadre. And as you probably know, John Carpenter dubbed his voice. So that's another level of detachment there. But I wonder where he is. Dre, get in touch if you're out there. I don't know anybody who knows where he is.
Have your surfing skills gotten any better since Dark Star?
They weren't very good in the first place. Although I have to say that probably the happiest day of my life is the first day I body surfed in Maui, a beach called Slaughterhouse on the northwest side. Don't do it in the winter. I think it would kill you. But on a board, I've been one time on a board in high school, and I got fiberglass in my arm. I purled, the board went up in the air and almost killed me, and I said, that's it. But I do love to surf, but just not standing up on a board getting killed.
Well, after all this time that has passed, and this was just a little project, and it's had such a cult phenomenon, are you surprised at the magnitude that this has gained?
I'm surprised at the longevity. I'm surprised at that. I still get fan mail. I still hear from people here and there all over the world, and that does surprise me. I haven't been recognized because of my hair, in many, many years. Although I used to. I was in a supermarket, a 24-hour market, which was pretty empty at 2 in the morning. And I was picking up something for a friend who was taking care of an elderly woman with Alzheimer's, and she couldn't leave, so I went at 2 in the morning to get something. And I'm walking through the vegetable section, and there's nobody else there, except a couple pushing a cart the other way. You could hear their footsteps echoing, And about halfway down the end of the store, they stop, and they go, "Hey, are you the guy in that space movie?" So stuff like that used to happen. But subsequently, only once has someone seen my name tag and said, "Are you the Brian Norell?" To which I said, "What are you talking about?" And they said, "Well, Dark Star, But, I'm pretty incognito these days. I'd have to get a wig and a beard, and then it could happen. But the films I've written for children, which I've been a lot of child actors in them, I was at lunch, this is in the late 80s, it's a while ago. I was at lunch with one of these actors, young actors, and he was 13 at the time, so he probably wasn't born, hardly born when Dark Star came out. And I mentioned something about it, because we were just talking about acting, and he said, "Oh yeah, I've seen that 3 times." And I remember I was stunned, like, "You what?" And subsequently I've run into all kinds of people. I was in India on my own one time, and I was stuck. This is a whole other long story. I don't know if I want to go into it, but I was stuck in a bad situation in Bombay. I didn't have any place to stay, and I tried to get in this big hotel, and they didn't have any rooms, and it was not a good scene. And I had been thinking about Steven Spielberg for 3 days because of this sort of mountain out in the desert where I was, and things about close encounters, synchronous kind of things were occurring to me. And so I was sort of obsessing about communicating this stuff to Steven Spielberg, who I'd never met, although I knew his producers because of my work with Lucasfilm. But anyway, I'm in this hotel, I'm in a bad situation, and in walks Steven Spielberg at 8:30 Monday night in a dark hotel, and with Frank Marshall and Kathy Kennedy and all the producers of Star Wars. And so I met him right then and there, and we went out and had dinner, and turns out that the Robert Watts, the British producer of Star Wars, was a big Dark Star fan. So I run into Dark Star fans, and last year I was down at Sony Pictures inside the production of 2012 in the computer graphics. And I had a lengthy meeting with Volker Engel, who won the Academy Award for Independence Day, who is another Dark Star fan. So, I mean, they're all over the place. And I never know when and where they're going to surface. But it's wonderful that it's still alive. And I'm grateful.
Well, aside from Dark Star, in 2006 you played Edward Spears in Kuksu. Mm-hmm. What attracted you to the part?
Well, it's like how it was with Carpenter. A friend of mine was producing this independent feature. He's produced 2 independent features, and I've been in both of them. It's kind of a I help you out, you help me out kind of relationship. This is the same guy, Peter Babakidis, who built most of the puppets for the films I've done for children, dealing with child abuse and self-esteem and empowerment and alcoholism and AIDS and a whole lot of issues. So we've had a long working relationship, and he's a multi-talented guy. So when he wants to do a feature and he taps me and say, I'm in, you know. But I haven't had an agent. I haven't been pursuing acting, but I've wound up in a lot of films, most of which I've written myself, just because the producer says, well, get in there, you know. And that was the case with Kuksu as well as Henry V, which he also produced and directed. And that was my one and only Shakespearean experience.
And speaking of Henry V, why did you pick the part of the Archbishop?
I was offered two different parts. The Duke of Exeter, I think that's Henry's uncle, or the Archbishop. And having the experience of being in films shot in the woods, wearing skimpy wizard outfits, catching pneumonia, you know, in lousy conditions, I decided, just practically speaking, that I had the choice between a guy wearing a nice robe in a soundstage, or a guy flinging swords around on real horses in the woods. And I know what the weather's like around here, and I know what films are like. Hurry up and wait. And then there's the danger of falling off and breaking your neck. And so I just, on a very practical level, I said, I'll take the Archbishop role. And then I really looked into it. I hadn't really looked into it. And I saw how many lines there are in Act 1, Scene 2. It goes on and on and on. And I thought, okay, well, Branagh and the Olivier film, I mean, they cut this stuff down for movies. So I asked the director, okay, before I memorize this, well, how are we going to cut it? How are you going to cut it? He says, oh, I'm not going to cut it. Oh, our version, we're going to do the whole thing. No. Yes. And then when we got to the soundstage, he decided that he'd do the whole scene, he'd do the scenes in master shots all the way through. And he said, we're going to do scene 2 first, not scene 1. I had memorized scene 1 for days. I had not memorized scene 2. So during makeup, I was memorizing scene 2. It was hellish. And then we recorded everything, and it goes on and on, blathering about all this genealogy and all these things. And then later on, he realized, oh man, I got to cut this, and he cut it to pieces, which it ought to be. I mean, I'm not blaming him, but it's like, oh my God. But it was quite an experience. And this shooting occurred like late 2000. It was synchronous to the election in 2000 and what was going on with that election and what happened because of that election. And it was so ironic because the Archbishop is manipulating the situation and instigating a war for political ends and financial ends. And there was just a lot of synchronous stuff there that I found really compelling. And I came to appreciate Shakespeare like I never had before by climbing into it and experiencing the language and also seeing you know, how brilliant he was in exposing these political machinations. And so I tend to look at the news today and see it in a more Shakespearean framework than just whatever they're telling you on the news. So it was a great experience, and I didn't fall off any horses or get hurt.
You've also done educational films as well. I see that you're involved in a series called Super Puppy.
Yeah.
What were your involvements in these films?
Well, after Twice Upon a Time, which was an animated feature with Lucasfilm, it was a Cordy picture with Lucas under Warner Brothers, and took, well, 3 years to produce, and it didn't open well, and the studio closed, and it was kind of a catastrophic, painful event when it all ended. And at that time, I felt that the weakness of the film was primarily in the writing, which I had been involved with peripherally, but got pulled off to take charge of production. I was supervising animator and sequence director on the film. And when it was all over, I decided I wouldn't let anybody call me an animator anymore, because I just wanted to focus on screenwriting. And there was a producer, Gary Mitchell, who had made a number of films about child abuse and spousal abuse and those kind of issues. And he knew I wanted to get back into puppetry, to the immediacy of puppetry and out of the time-consuming nature of animation. And so he invited me to look at a script, and it had some animation scenes in it. And he said, maybe you want to turn those into puppet things, and we could do some puppet things, you know. And I read the script, and I said, well, those scenes really call for animation. I mean, there's some things that need to be animated. I said, however, I think the script sucks. And he said, okay, here's some money, fix the script. So I went home and I started, taking wrenches and screwdrivers to the script. And I realized this is a car that you don't fix. This is a car you push off the cliff. So I pushed his script off the cliff and wrote The Wizard of No. And that was, that was a big shift for me. And then he said, well, you're going to be the wizard. And I said, okay. And that's how the casting goes, okay. And it went on to win the Blue Ribbon at the New York, the American Film Festival in New York. And at one point, at a $50,000 production, it had grossed over 1.3 million in sales. So it was a huge event in the mid '80s, promoting self-empowerment and in particular about smoking and cigarettes and stuff, but mainly teaching kids how to say no and how to stick up for what's right for them and not buckle to peer pressure. So that was the beginning of that relationship with the J. Gary Mitchell Film Company that has resulted in close to 30 films that involve, mostly for little kids, mostly with puppets, that contain animation, that have also live action. So it's all, I brought everything to bear with those films. And they're still available on powerkids.com. They're available in English and Spanish, and there are kids out there watching them today. And we hope to, continue to make more and to do, I'm working right now with a therapist that we've consulted with since the 70s, I think, to produce materials to help kids in their recovery from sexual abuse. So whereas I come out of initially writing and working for Sesame Street, I brought that same sensibility of Sesame Street to issues like AIDS, sexual abuse, alcoholism, and continue to do so.
Where you're talking about the tobacco stopping and
Yeah.
all that. What was some of the significant results or some of the accomplishments that came out being, the Wizard of No?
Well, I mean, obviously, if it sold that well, it means a lot of kids saw it. It had a lot of impact. My other series, the What to Do series, with the two frogs, What and To Do, dealing more directly with sexual abuse and predation and protection, was adopted years ago by the LA County Sheriff's Department and used as the model for their county-wide programs in LA schools. So to hear that is really rewarding, to see that the broad reach and the impact these films have. And probably the most significant and rewarding experience was to hear about a 4-year-old girl somewhere back in the Midwest who blew the whistle on a molester. I don't know who, but when interrogated by the DA and asked, how did you know what to do? She just matter-of-factly said, the frogs told me. I mean, at her age, they're just as real as you and me, and that's where she learned what to do. And so when she got into trouble, she did what she was told to do, and ratted this guy out, and he's going to jail, thank you very much. So to hear that, because as a writer for Sesame Street, as a writer for educational films that go into schools, there's no film festivals, there's no audience, there's no feedback, it's like just a big empty echo chamber. So to get a piece of news like that, it didn't just make my day. I mean, it made my decade, and it still is more important to me than all the still gold statues and awards that I've won.
Tell me about Fergus the Bunny.
Fergus the Bunny was one of many puppets that I've created in this educational series. That one in particular dealt with alcoholism. And it's amazing because as I go from one subject to another, I get to study and meet with top professionals and do research. And so I learned a great deal about alcoholism through working with Fergus. And when I got married, going on 9 years ago, my wife, long before we were a couple, we worked together. I worked on her TV series. She worked on my films. And so on our wedding invitation, it said that her mother invites you to the joining of us as, and then it said frogs, and then it was scratched out, and then it said dragons, and then it was scratched out, and then it said dogs, and then it was scratched out, and then it said rabbits, and then it was scratched out, and then it said man and wife, which is where we had evolved to. So our relationship sort of evolved phylogenetically. We're almost like that evolution chart, because we have been frogs together, dragons together, dogs together, rabbits together, and now we're married.
Aside from the feature films and educational films, you have done television as well. Tell us about the series Bingo and Molly.
Bingo and Molly was a Discovery Channel, Learning Channel, Discovery Kids series. It was on for 5 years, from about 97 to 2001 or so. And it was produced in New Zealand, in a co-production with TV New Zealand. And initially, Robin was hired to create that show and was given the opportunity to bring one puppeteer from America, just for cost reasons. So she auditioned 7 people. I got the part, and we'd worked together over the years. And I went down there, and all the other puppeteers were cast from New Zealand and Australia. And we just loved New Zealand. I still have a bank account there with nothing in it, but it's just symbolic. But we got to work with Richard Taylor, who built all the puppets for us, Peter Jackson's partner, who's Lord of the Rings and everything else. And the puppets were just beyond exquisite. And everyone we worked with there, on every level, was just first class. And the set was in the second largest soundstage, I think, in the Southern Hemisphere. Stage 11 at TV New Zealand is really big. And so we had 4 or 5 large sets, some 2 stories high, in permanent position. And the pedestal cameras would just rotate around one way or the other and relight, and boom, 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 boom. We'd knock off these shows at breathtaking pace. And in the process of living and working together under such tight conditions and under such pressure, my relationship with Robin, which had been about 20 years standing at that point, shifted completely. And we came back as a couple, which shocked the hell out of everybody we knew. And we got married about 9 years ago. So, so we've been married about 9 years. We've been a couple about 13 years. And we've been friends for about 32 years, something like that. So a lot of history. And I also have performed and written for her award-winning TV show Buster and Me, which was on NBC in the Bay Area for 20 years. And so we share a lot of history.
Tell us about the San Diego Chicken.
In the early 70s, I think it was 74, I went down to San Diego to work for an animation company there that is just starting up. And they wanted me to create an animated film that would be a little demo piece for them. So I was busy working on that, and I overheard them talking about having to submit a bid to an ad agency for a TV commercial. And it was none of my business. I'm just eavesdropping. And it's a radio station, a rock and roll station, and something about they want a chicken. It didn't make no sense to me. But I'm eavesdropping, so it doesn't have to make sense to me. But I heard them, they wanted a chicken for some reason. And I never figured that out. But I said to the producer after they left, I said, look, if you have to submit a bid tomorrow morning, what if I stop what I'm doing and just animated the chicken in pencil? You shoot it in 16 millimeter plus X, black and white. This was in an office building. It wasn't like a real studio building. So in order to develop it, he would have to go in the men's room with this plastic thing and chemicals, under the sink, which they would do sometimes. And so I suggested he do that. And then the way you dry the film is you hang it from paper clips in a closet like this, back and forth, and then roll it up on a core. So it's a very primitive process. But he said, okay. So I spent the afternoon, I animated 45 seconds worth of animation, which is a lot. And the way I did it was by a series of tracings of poses. So you trace a pose 4 times, and the line will never be perfect because you're not a Xerox machine. And then when you hit a pose and you randomly photograph those 4 or 5 drawings, the line quality stays alive. It doesn't feel like it's a dead drawing. So I created this wacky chicken coming out and doing these insane acrobatics, balancing on one wing and all this kind of silliness. And he developed in the men's room and dried it on the paper clips and rolled it up on the core, took it in the morning. And I'm trying to get to New York the next day. I have a plane ticket for some meeting. And he informs me I can't go because we got the job. And so there were a series of delays, and I was asked to storyboard some commercials, ideas. And then some animators would design chickens, and they'd make choices, and I could go to New York. So I spent more time drawing the boxes to make some large, storyboards than I did what I put inside the boxes, because I'm just trying to nail an idea really fast. And so they came in and looked at my quick storyboards, and they looked at the chickens that the animators had designed. And I'm itching to get to New York. I can't wait to get out the door. And then they form a huddle in the production meeting, and they said, well, we want this story, we like this one, this commercial idea. And in terms of what chicken design to use, we want to use the chicken design that's in the storyboards. What? Cancel New York. And then I had to stay and animate and direct it too. And it was all very successful. The KGB Radio, their ARB ratings shot up, and by the second time around, the next campaign cycle, they had me writing copy for billboards and stuff. And by then they'd made a suit, a chicken suit, really ugly chicken suit, and found some sucker to get in it for $2 an hour. Little did they know what they were doing when they hired Ted Giannoulis to do that. Nobody knew what was in store at that point. But anyway, so I wrote immortal words like KGB Radio, Rock Around the Clock, which is done in graffiti by this chicken, which is now photographic, in this ugly suit. And then they made a nicer suit. And then Ted started making this chicken so popular that teams like the St. Louis and other teams wanted him to come. And the KGB Radio says, you can't go to St. Louis. I mean, that doesn't serve our marketing needs. You represent us, the radio station. And Ted said, well, I'll just change the color of the suit and do my own thing. And they said, oh, no, you won't. And they slapped an injunction on him. And long story short, he won the court battle, which is now, I think, Giannoulis versus Brown, taught in the law schools, about our inalienable rights as Americans to be chickens. And he's been chickening now for, what would it be, 36 years, I guess. Threatening to retire, I hear, but still going. And he's performed before over 7 million people live, I think. So to give birth to something which, propelled by the genius of Ted Giannoulis, who's busted his butt for many decades, it's not every cartoonist or writer who gets to see that kind of longevity and impact. So I'm very proud of Ted and everything he's done. He's done an amazing job.
So when you're not surfing in space, filming commercials and winning awards, what do you do in your spare time?
Well, I've always had a love of animals. So I have a dog puppet now named War and Peace that I perform with, mostly in cabarets, sort of stand-up comedy kind of stuff. Hey, how you doing there? Name's Warren Peace, and this guy over here, I think you know who he is. He's either the world's worst ventriloquist or the world's most aggressive proctologist. Haven't figured that out yet. Anyway, I am a canine poet. I'm the probably preeminent canine poet because I don't know of any other canine poets. Do you? So I'll give you one of my short poems. It's only 2 lines long. I call these low coups. This one is called The Temple. Inside every dog, there is a temple of joy. You can pick the lock with a tennis ball. And my love of dogs has gotten me adopted by the local dog club called Best Friends Canine Club. And so every morning, including this morning, I'm down there with up to 30 or 40 dogs, depending on the weather. And so that's part of what I do. But the other part is I became a pilot about 20 years ago. And whenever finances allow, I try to get up in the air. I love it up there, but there are no dogs up there.
Is there any parting words you'd like to give?
Well, every now and then I still have sort of this itch to blow up planets. It's hard to get rid of.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.